The truck stop diner sat at the junction of Interstate 40 and Highway 287 in Amarillo, Texas, a place where long-haul truckers and cross-country travelers stopped for fuel and food. The neon sign out front flickered, open 24 hours, and at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in September, the parking lot was half full of semis and a handful of cars. And one motorcycle, a black Harley parked under a light pole, its chrome catching the glow. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and frying bacon. Most of the booths were occupied by truckers nursing mugs and reading on their phones, waiting for their mandatory rest periods to end. At the counter sat a man in his early 50s wearing a leather vest with patches. The vest identified him as Lance, a member of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and a face that looked like it had seen some hard miles. Lance had been riding for 3 days straight, heading from Los Angeles to Nashville for his daughter's wedding. He was exhausted, running on caffeine and stubbornness, but he'd promised his daughter he'd be there, and he'd be damned if he broke that promise. His ex-wife had tried to talk him out of riding, said he should fly like a normal person, but flying wasn't Lance's style. He needed the road, needed the time alone with his thoughts, needed the meditation that came from hours on the bike. The waitress who'd been serving him was named Angela Martinez. She was in her late 20s, small and tired-looking, with dark circles under her eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. She'd been working doubles all week, covering for a coworker who'd quit without notice, and the exhaustion was written in every line of her body. But she was professional and kind, keeping Lance's coffee cup filled, checking if he needed anything else with the kind of genuine care that suggested she actually gave a damn about her customers. Lance had ordered a burger and fries, road food, nothing fancy, and Angela had brought it out hot and fast. He'd thanked her, tipped well on his first coffee refill, established himself as someone who appreciated good service. Now he was finishing his meal, checking his phone for weather conditions on the route ahead, calculating whether he could make it to Oklahoma City before he needed to stop for real sleep. Angela approached with the check, setting it face down on the counter the way waitresses do. "Anything else I can get you?" "I'm good, thanks. Appreciate the service." Lance reached for his wallet. "Safe travels," Angela said, and there was something in her voice, something tight and scared, that made Lance look at her more closely. Her smile was still in place, but her eyes were afraid. Her hands were shaking slightly as she walked away. Lance frowned and picked up the check. When he flipped it over, he found a note underneath, written in hurried handwriting on a napkin. "The man in the back booth has been watching me all night. He followed me from my car when my shift started. I think he's waiting to follow me back when I get off in 20 minutes. I'm scared. I don't know who else to ask. Can you help? Please don't let him see this note. Angela." Lance froze. He read the note twice, 3 times, making sure he understood what he was reading. Then, very carefully, without turning around or making any sudden movements, he folded the note and put it in his pocket. He pulled out his wallet and placed cash on top of the check, enough to cover the meal and a generous tip, and casually looked around the diner. The back booth Angela had mentioned held a single man, maybe 40, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket despite the Texas heat. He was nursing a cup of coffee he'd barely touched, and his eyes kept tracking Angela as she moved through the diner. Not the appreciative glance of someone admiring a pretty woman, but the focused attention of a predator watching prey. Lance felt ice settle in his gut. He recognized that look. He'd seen it before, in darker places, and nothing good ever came from it. He stood up slowly and walked to the men's room, passing close enough to the back booth to get a better look at the man. Mid-40s, average build, nothing remarkable about him except the intensity of his focus on Angela, the kind of guy who could disappear into a crowd, the kind of guy who could follow someone without being noticed. In the bathroom, Lance pulled out his phone and called Axel, the vice president of his chapter and his closest friend in the club. It rang 4 times before Axel answered, his voice groggy. "This better be important. It's 2 in the morning. "It is." "I'm at a truck stop in Amarillo. Got a situation. Waitress here slipped me a note saying there's a guy who's been following her, watching her. She thinks he's going to follow her home when she gets off shift." "You believe her?" "Yeah. I've seen the guy. He's got that look." "You call the cops?" "Not yet. Wanted to call you first. What's the club's reach out here?" Amarillo? We've got connections with the Desert Riders. Good guys. I can make some calls, get you back up if you need it. Do it. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I'm not leaving her alone with this creep. You're a good man, Lance. I'll get you help. Give me 15 minutes. Lance hung up and went back to the counter. Angela was at the register, checking out a trucker. Lance caught her eye and gave a slight nod, trying to convey that he'd gotten the message and he was helping. She saw the nod, and something in her posture relaxed just slightly. Lance sat back down and ordered another coffee. He wasn't going anywhere until Angela was safe. The minutes ticked by. The man in the back booth didn't move, didn't order more food, just sat there watching. Lance kept his body language casual, but his senses alert, tracking the man's movements, ready to act if necessary. At 2:30, Angela disappeared into the back. Lance knew she was probably getting ready to clock out. The man in the back booth checked his watch and stood up, dropping a few bills on the table. He walked toward the exit slowly like he was in no hurry, but Lance could see the purpose in his movement. Lance stood too and followed at a distance. Outside, the parking lot was quieter now, a few trucks still idling, but fewer people moving around. The man walked toward the side of the building where the employee parking was located, tucking himself into the shadows near a dumpster, where he'd have a clear view of anyone coming out the employee entrance. Lance's phone buzzed, a text from Axel. 3 Desert Riders en route. ETA 10 minutes. Don't do anything stupid. Lance texted back, define stupid. He pocketed his phone and walked toward his motorcycle, making it obvious, letting his boots hit the pavement with purpose. The man in the shadows tensed, watching Lance, trying to figure out if he was a threat. Lance sat on his bike but didn't start it, just sat there, visible, a clear presence. The man in the shadows shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of his plan. He'd been expecting to follow Angela unnoticed, but now there was a biker in the parking lot, sitting on his motorcycle like he was waiting for something. 5 minutes passed. Then the employee door opened, and Angela came out in civilian clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, her hair down, looking younger and more vulnerable without her work uniform. She saw Lance on his bike and stopped, clearly surprised he was still there. The man in the shadows took a step forward. Lance started his bike. The engine roared to life, loud in the quiet parking lot, and the man froze. Lance revved at once, making sure the man knew he was being watched. Angela walked quickly to her car, an old Honda sedan parked under a light. Lance watched her get in, watched her start the engine, and then he saw the man in the shadows begin to move toward his own vehicle, a nondescript sedan parked 2 rows over. Lance pulled his bike alongside Angela's car and gestured for her to roll down her window. She did, fear clear on her face. I'm going to follow you home, Lance said. That guy is going to try to follow you, but I'm not going to let him get close. You understand? You don't have to... Yeah, I do. Just drive normally. I'll be right behind you. Angela's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's get you home safe. Angela pulled out of the parking lot and Lance followed. The sedan pulled out too, trying to keep a discreet distance, but Lance made sure his motorcycle stayed between Angela's car and the stalkers. He rode close, making it clear that Angela wasn't alone, that she was protected. They drove through the dark streets of Amarillo, Angela heading toward what Lance assumed was her apartment. The sedan followed for a few blocks, then seemed to realize this wasn't going to work. There was a witness, someone who could identify him, someone who wasn't going to let him get close. At a stoplight, the sedan suddenly turned off, disappearing down a side street. Lance stayed with Angela, following her all the way to an apartment complex on the south side of town. She pulled into a spot, and Lance parked his bike nearby. He waited while she got out of her car, walking her to the building entrance. He's gone, Lance said. Turned off about a mile back, but you need to call the police and report this, tonight. What do I tell them? He didn't actually do anything. He was just there. You tell them what you told me. That he followed you from your car at the start of your shift. That he watched you all night. That he waited outside to follow you home. That's stalking, and it's illegal. They might not be able to do much tonight, but at least there'll be a report, a paper trail. Angela nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. You were the only person in that diner who looked like maybe you could help. You did the right thing. Asking for help is smart, not weak. Why did you help me? You don't even know me. Lance thought about that, about his daughter, who was about Angela's age, about his ex-wife's sister, who'd been stalked by an ex-boyfriend and had ended up hurt because nobody had taken it seriously, about the code he lived by. Protect those who need protecting, stand up when others sit down, be the kind of man your mother hoped you'd become. Because it was the right thing to do, Lance said simply, and because nobody should have to be that scared just for going to work. Tears streamed down Angela's face. Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. Lance heard motorcycles approaching, 3 of them, rumbling into the parking lot, the Desert Riders arriving as promised. 3 men dismounted and walked over, their vests identifying them as members of a different club, but brothers in the same cause. The lead rider, a man in his 60s with a white beard and a patch identifying him as Wizard, approached Lance. Axel called, said you might need backup. Situation's mostly handled. Waitress was being stalked. I followed her home and the creep took off, but I want to make sure she's safe tonight. Wizard turned to Angela. Ma'am, we're going to post someone out here tonight. Make sure nobody comes around who shouldn't. Tomorrow you need to file a police report and maybe look into getting a restraining order, but tonight you sleep safe. We'll keep watch. Angela looked at the 4 bikers standing in her apartment complex parking lot like leather-clad guardian angels and started crying harder. I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? Because that's what we do, Wizard said gently. We protect people who need protecting. Now go inside, lock your doors, and get some rest. We'll be out here. Angela went inside, and Lance spent the next hour with the Desert Riders, explaining the situation in detail, giving them a description of the stalker and his vehicle. Wizard called it in to a contact he had in the Amarillo Police Department, a detective who specialized in stalking cases. Within 2 hours, there was a patrol car parked outside Angela's apartment complex, and the police had a report on file. Lance finally felt comfortable leaving around 5 in the morning. He'd lost several hours of travel time, but he didn't care. He shook hands with the Desert Riders, thanking them for showing up, and Wizard waved him off. This is what brothers do. You'd do the same for us. Damn right I would. Lance got back on his bike and headed east, watching the sun rise over the Texas plains. He was exhausted now, running on fumes, but he felt good, purposeful, like he'd done something that mattered. He stopped for gas in Oklahoma City and checked his phone. There was a text from Axel. Desert Riders said you handled yourself well. Proud of you, brother. Now get to your daughter's wedding. There was also a text from an unknown number. This is Angela. Wizard gave me your number. Police came this morning. They're taking the stalking seriously because of the report you helped me file. They're looking for the guy. I wanted to say thank you again. You saved my life. I really believe that. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please let me know. Lance texted back, just stay safe. That's all the thanks I need. And if you ever feel unsafe again, call the club. The Iron Saints and the Desert Riders have your back now. He put his phone away and got back on the road, pushing toward Nashville, toward his daughter, toward the future. Lance made it to Nashville with hours to spare. He cleaned up at a motel, changed into the suit he'd brought in his saddlebag, and arrived at his daughter's wedding looking tired but presentable. His daughter, Melissa, hugged him tight when she saw him. You made it. I was worried. Told you I'd be here. Wouldn't miss this for anything. How was the ride? Lance thought about Angela, about the note under his bill, about the stalker in the shadows, and the Desert Riders showing up in the middle of the night. Eventful, he said, but good. Really good. The wedding was beautiful. Lance walked Melissa down the aisle, gave a toast at the reception, danced with his daughter, and even made polite conversation with his ex-wife. It was a good day, the kind of day that reminded him what mattered: family, connection, showing up for the people you loved. On the drive back to Los Angeles a week later, Lance stopped at the truck stop in Amarillo. It was mid-afternoon this time, the lunch rush, in full swing. He walked into the diner and looked for Angela, but she wasn't working. A different waitress, an older woman, came over to take his order. Is Angela working today? Lance asked. Angela? No, she quit last week. Gave notice right after something happened. She got a new job at a restaurant on the other side of town. Safer area, better hours, better pay. She doing okay? Far as I know. Why you asking? I helped her out with a situation. Just wanted to make sure she was all right. The waitress's expression softened. You're the biker. She told us about you, about how you stayed and followed her home and called your friends. She was real grateful. Said you saved her life. I just did what anyone should have done. But most people wouldn't have. Most people would have minded their own business. You didn't. That matters. Lance ordered coffee and a burger, same as before, and sat at the counter thinking about choices and consequences. Angela had made a choice to ask for help, a scary, vulnerable choice. Lance had made a choice to respond, an inconvenient, potentially dangerous choice, and those two choices had changed the trajectory of Angela's life. She'd gotten away from the stalker, had moved to a safer job, was rebuilding her sense of security, all because she'd been brave enough to write a note, and Lance had been decent enough to act on it. When Lance got back to Los Angeles, he told the story at a club meeting. The other members listened intently, and when he finished, the club president, a man named Cutter, nodded approvingly. You represented the club well. That's exactly what we're about, protecting people who need it, being the kind of men who step up when others step back. I'm proud of you, Lance. It wasn't a club thing. It was just the right thing to do. That's the point. The club doesn't make us good men. We're good men who happen to form a club. But when one of us does something like this, it reflects on all of us. It reminds people that bikers aren't all criminals and troublemakers. Some of us are actually trying to make the world a little bit safer. The story spread through the motorcycle community, as these stories do. Other clubs heard about what Lance had done, about the desert riders showing up, about Angela being protected. And it sparked conversations about what clubs could do to help women in vulnerable situations, how they could be more than just riding groups, but actual forces for good in their communities. The Iron Saints started a program they called Safe Ride Home. They distributed cards to servers at truck stops and late-night diners with a phone number they could call if they felt unsafe. When someone called, club members would show up, not to cause trouble, but to escort the person home, to be a visible deterrent to anyone with bad intentions. Other clubs adopted similar programs. Within a year, there was a network of motorcycle clubs across the Southwest offering protection to service industry workers who felt threatened. They called it the Guardian Rider Network, and it helped dozens of people get home safely. Angela heard about the program through social media and reached out to Lance. I can't believe this started because of me. Because of one note, I slipped under a bill. It started because you were brave enough to ask for help, Lance told her over the phone, and because enough people cared to respond. That's how change happens. One person is brave, others respond, and suddenly you've got a movement. I want to help. I want to be part of this. You are part of it. You're the reason it exists. No, I want to actively help. I work with a lot of other servers now at the new restaurant. Some of them have their own scary stories. Can I give them the number? Can I tell them about the program? Absolutely. That's exactly what we want. The more people who know about it, the more people we can help. Angela became an unofficial ambassador for the Guardian Rider Network, spreading the word to other service industry workers, helping them understand that there were people they could call if they felt unsafe. She also started attending community meetings where motorcycle clubs talked about their outreach work, telling her story, putting a human face on the problem of stalking and the solution of community protection. 2 years after that night at the truck stop, Angela was invited to speak at a national conference on stalking prevention. She told her story, the stalker in the diner, the note under the bill, the biker who'd stayed, the network of protection that had grown from that one night. The audience was riveted. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What made you decide to ask the biker for help? Weren't you scared of him too?" I was scared, Angela admitted, but I looked at him and I saw someone who seemed solid, someone who was tired but alert, who treated me with respect, who tipped well and said thank you. And I made a judgment call that he was less of a threat than the man who'd been following me. I was right, but I also want to be clear. I got lucky. Lance was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man who was willing to help. Not every biker would have been, not every person, period, would have been. But I think there's something to be said for trusting your instincts and being willing to ask for help when you need it. Lance was in the audience. He'd been invited to speak on a panel about community-based violence prevention. After Angela's talk, they hugged, and she said, "I've been wanting to ask you something. What were you thinking when you read my note? What made you decide to help?" Lance thought back to that moment, picking up the check, seeing the note, reading Angela's desperate plea. "I thought about my daughter. I thought about how I'd want someone to help her if she was in that situation, and I thought about the kind of man I want to be, the kind who doesn't look away when someone needs help. That's all it was. Pretty simple, really." "It's not simple at all. Most people would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. You didn't. That's extraordinary." "I disagree. I think most people would help if they could. They just need permission or encouragement or an example. That's what we're trying to do with the Guardian Rider Network. Show people that helping is possible, that it makes a difference, that we can create systems of protection that work." The Guardian Rider Network continued to grow. What had started with Lance responding to a note under a bill had become a nationwide program with chapters in 30 states. They'd helped over 500 people get home safely, had prevented countless assaults and stalking situations, had changed the way communities thought about motorcycle clubs. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. News outlets ran stories about the unlikely heroes in leather vests, about how motorcycle clubs were redefining what it meant to be protectors, about the power of community-based solutions to violence prevention. But Lance stayed humble about his role. When reporters interviewed him, he always redirected the attention to Angela. "She's the hero of this story," he'd say. "She had the courage to ask for help when she needed it. That's not easy. We live in a society that tells people to handle everything themselves, that asking for help is weakness. But Angela was smart enough and brave enough to reach out. I just responded. Anyone could have done what I did, but not everyone could have done what she did." On the 5-year anniversary of that night, the Guardian Rider Network held a celebration in Amarillo. Over 200 bikers attended, along with dozens of people who'd been helped by the program. There were speeches and testimonials, food and music, a real celebration of what the community had built. Angela spoke, and she was poised and confident now, a far cry from the scared waitress she'd been 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was being stalked by a stranger. I was terrified. I felt powerless, and I made a desperate choice. I wrote a note and slipped it under a biker's bill, asking for help. That note changed my life. It changed Lance's life, and it sparked a movement that has helped hundreds of people and saved countless lives. She looked at Lance, who was standing in the back of the crowd. "Lance, would you come up here?" Lance reluctantly made his way to the front, and Angela handed him a plaque. It read, "To Lance Morrison, who stopped when others would have passed by, who helped when others would have looked away, who started a movement by simply doing the right thing. With gratitude from everyone whose life has been changed by the Guardian Rider Network." Lance held the plaque and felt his throat tighten. "I don't need recognition for this. I did what anyone should do." "But not everyone did," Angela said. "You did. And that matters. That's why we're all here. That's why 500 people are safer. That's why communities across the country now have systems in place to protect vulnerable people. Because you read a note, and you didn't ignore it." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lance stood there overwhelmed by the response. He thought about that night 5 years ago, exhausted from 3 days of riding, just wanting to get to his daughter's wedding, reading Angela's desperate plea, and making the split-second decision to help. Such a small choice, such massive consequences. After the celebration, Lance and Angela sat on his motorcycle in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Angela said. "What would have happened if I hadn't written that note, if I'd just gone home alone, hoping for the best?" "Don't think about that." "I can't help it. I think about how different my life would be, how maybe I wouldn't have a life at all. That guy, they caught him eventually. He'd been stalking other women, had a history of escalating behavior. The detective told me I was lucky, that things could have gone very badly. But they didn't. You were brave, and I was there, and we got through it together. And then we built something beautiful from it. That's the part that amazes me. We didn't just survive something bad. We created something good, something that helps other people survive too." Lance nodded. "That's how you heal from trauma. You take the experience and you transform it into purpose. You don't let it destroy you. You let it reshape you into someone who can help others. Is that what you did? Transformed your trauma? Lance thought about his own history, the violence he'd witnessed, the friends he'd lost, the years of struggling to find meaning after a life lived on the edges. Yeah, I guess I did. The club helped with that, gave me a brotherhood, a code, a reason to be better. And now, the Guardian Rider Network gives me a mission, something that matters. We're lucky, you know. Not everyone gets a second chapter like this. Then we owe it to the people who don't, to make the most of ours. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple. Angela eventually said goodbye and headed to her car, a newer Honda now, safer and more reliable. Lance watched her drive away, remembering the scared woman who'd written a desperate note, seeing the confident woman she'd become. He started his motorcycle and headed for the highway, thinking about notes and choices and the way one moment of bravery, asking for help, had rippled outward into a movement that was still growing, still saving lives, still proving that the world held more good than people sometimes believed. The waitress had slipped a note under a biker's bill. When he read it, he froze, but not with fear or anger or indifference, with recognition of a moment that mattered, a choice that would define him, a chance to be exactly the kind of man he'd always wanted to be. And he'd made the right choice, and that choice had changed everything. For Angela, who'd found safety and purpose, for Lance, who'd found renewed meaning in protection and service, for the hundreds of people who'd been helped by the Guardian Rider Network, for the communities that had learned that bikers weren't threats but allies, for everyone who'd heard the story and decided to be a little braver about asking for help or a little more willing to give it. One note, one choice, endless ripples. That was the power of seeing someone in need and deciding they mattered enough to help. That was the power of being brave enough to admit you needed help and trusting someone enough to ask. That was the power of community, of brotherhood, of human beings choosing to take care of each other. The waitress slipped a note under a biker's bill, and when he read it, he froze. But he didn't stay frozen. He moved, he acted, he helped. And that movement created a wave that was still washing over the world, making it safer, kinder, better. One person at a time, one note at a time, one choice at a time. That was how you changed the world.